thanks to you, Chris, for setting the meeting up to talk about this extraordinarily important issue. And I say extraordinarily important, not just because of the fee, but because of stormwater management and the environmental opportunities that it presents to us. And this is sort of a quick pitch for sort of the philosophy of stormwater management. You know, we tend to think of these things because they're new or they're different or there's regulatory or permitting requirements as some sort of a problem. And I think free water these days and going into the future is actually a tremendous opportunity. And I think that what we need to be thinking about in urban environments like Washington, D.C. is how we can ask that water to hang around for a while. You know, we treat it as though it's, you know, something that's just got to be gotten out of the way and gone as quickly as possible. I tend to think of it differently. George, I'm sure, will tell you in private, if not publicly, that they're in the process of raising rates on the order of 40% over a 4-year period. All of a sudden, you know, the idea of taking a bit of water that you could otherwise drink and give to your kids and washing your car with it or watering the trees and lawn begins to sound like a pretty absurd proposition, especially when Mother Nature does what she's doing for us today and dumping a bunch of this free stuff on us. So, you know, at some point very soon it's just going to be an absurdity that we're not doing everything humanly possible to hang on to the water. And in that process, of course, reducing the amount of force with which it is now going into our streams and rivers and creating all sorts of erosion problems, sweeping our streets of pollution and otherwise creating some havoc in our natural environment. So all of it, if you add it up, it just doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And so as part of that, and certainly in keeping with EPA's desires on this front and our own homegrown interests in dealing effectively with groundwater, we are negotiating with EPA on an MS4 permit, which you all are very familiar with, maybe to varying degrees, but indeed that is happening. We expect to hear back from them with a final permit sometime. We also are, and have been for some time, working on developing homegrown stormwater regulations for the district, which is a very public process, continues to be, and one we're working with many of you on, for which we are extremely grateful. We hope to get those out sometime in the not too distant future. So I think the stormwater future for DC is pretty bright. Hi. Okay, is a bright one, and I think, frankly, you know, all this talk about retention standards and all the rest is the sort of thing. Also, as we get a few years down the road, we're going to be looking back and think how quaint it is that we're talking about an inch or 1.2 inch of retention when we're going full bore and taking this very, very seriously. We'll allow the technology to show us a way and allow our best practices to show how it is that we can keep that water around. So really what we're asking DC to do and what cities around the country are endeavoring to do is just behave a little bit more naturally as it relates to water, which I think is just a terrific opportunity. So having said that, it's with great dismay that we find out that the feds, who are so intent on us doing everything we can humanly do with regards to stormwater management, somehow or other figure that they shouldn't be partners in that process in terms of giving us the capacity to deal with it. And so the quick history is first of all, DC Water has a fee that they charge on a citywide basis, a stormwater fee. An impervious surface fee is probably a better way of describing it, which is a way for everybody to kick in proportionate to the amount of contribution that they make to the system of stormwater based on roofs, sidewalks, driveways, you name it, that's impervious, sends water places that we would rather it didn't go with quite the rapidity and all the pollutants in it. We charge a stormwater fee as well based on impervious surface. We have a new rule that is just coming into force, which is going to actually on a residential front make that a graded, tiered system, so that if you've got a lot more roof, you've got a lot more sidewalk, you're going to pay a lot more of that fee. If you've got less, chances are you'll be part of that 19,000 people who are going to be paying actually a lower stormwater fee. And that tends to be folks who don't have all the resources in the world to contribute to things like this. So, and it's you know, it's got its equity issues associated with it as well. So that's afoot. But we we're about a third covered by federal facilities in one form or fashion in the district. There's no way we're going to achieve our stormwater objectives without them being active partners. And frankly, we're going to have a hell of a time paying for this without them being actively involved in that side of it. They are about 20% of our revenues, and without that 20%, and given our budgetary circumstances, we're going to be 1/5 short of our capacity to do what we need to do in the district in terms of stormwater management. And I have to say that Jonathan's efforts and Hamid's efforts on behalf of the Department of the Environment have been stellar in terms of putting us at the top of the heap in terms of nation cities and dealing with these problems. And if you didn't already know it, the district is number 2 in the country in square footage of green roofs in place. And we're coming up very shortly on our 1,000,000th square foot of green roof on the District of Columbia, which, if you do the calculations, is somewhere in the upper 20s, close to 30 acres worth of green roof. And there's a whole lot of other stuff that we can be doing personally on our homes and as businesses and as office buildings and all the rest. And we're bound and determined to make that work for us as well. So what do we do? What do we do? We've got, whether it's an MS4 permit or the stormwater regulations that we're looking at, a fairly tall order to deal with these issues. There is expense involved. We figure it's about $13.2 million a year to meet what we anticipate will be our requirements under the MS4 permit. What do we do without a fifth of that? Well, I guess it goes without saying that we don't agree with GAO's assessment. We think that they're coming from la-la land in terms of their legal analysis on all of this, which somehow or other, using the same facts, figured that it makes a difference. That DC Water is going to be doing something with stormwater versus what we want to do with the rest of the district, which is not part of the CSO area. We think that's baloney. I think one of the logical courses of action is when they're not paying their bills, as they're not paying the bills, well, we ought to do what we do when people don't pay their bills. That's an idea. But maybe I'd just give our lawyers a little exercise and go after them legally and say, hey, and get an independent opinion that could quite possibly be different than what GAO's legal opinion is with regards to whether this is a fee or a tax. And in case you didn't know it, feds don't pay taxes, but they can pay fees. We have structured this thing to be a fee. It is a fee. It's related to the amount of impact people have on the environment and is directly used to take care of the problem that they are otherwise creating by the impervious surface they're imposing on our city. So that's one option, and we're working on figuring out the variety of approaches that might entail. I know that John and his group are thinking about this, and I know Appleseed and a lot of others are thinking about what their options and angles and opportunities might be there as well. And certainly we need to sit down and talk collectively about what our strategy should be that way. The other part of this that I explained is that we're 1/5 short of what we need to do to actually do the job. And so we are in the process of communicating EPA that we are somewhat hamstrung, and this could have some effect on what we'd be able to do on an MS4 permit. And we're certainly not going to receive with open arms an MS4 permit along the lines of the draft that we've seen when we don't have the capacity to do that. Stretch as it might be in its best of worlds, when we don't have the $13.2 million that we need to get the job done, we're going to have some discussions on the substance of that permit and figure out what we can do there. One option is to say to EPA, well, since we can't charge the fee, why don't you write 1,400 or so individual permits for each of those federal facilities to govern their stormwater contributions to the district? So, it's all well and good for us to go out there and, A, force federal facilities to do the act, whatever it is, in order to get their stormwater management up to snuff. For us to be a pilot for them because they are, manifestly unable to do that themselves. So if it's okay to ask the district to do things and bend over backward and try to protect our environment under the Clean Water Act, which we're perfectly happy to do, and if we're hamstrung by decisions the federal government is making otherwise, then maybe EPA ought to take the burden on and find a way to get the feds to do this. Yeah.
I'm in favor of the federal government paying the fee or the tax, but what I'm confused about is GSA at first said they wouldn't pay the impervious surface area fee, but now they've relented and said they are going to pay that. So how do you come back to the federal government and say you're not being fair when they've already relented on one of the two?
Let me go back to basic here. There are two fees, and they have relented on the DC water fee, which actually is the larger fee. I mean, that is the fee that is going to help them put the long-term control plan in place. Hugely expensive, big engineering projects and all the rest of it. Ours is a relatively smaller fee, which they have said because we want to do good green works with it. Obviously, that's got to be some sort of a tax. And I'm being very facetious, but the point is that they have disproved one. They have approved one, disproved the other, and we're trying to figure out what to do with the other fee that would deal with the MS4 areas of Washington. Areas that you're familiar with in your neighborhood, probably feeding directly stormwater into Rock Creek or wherever that may be. So it's a real challenge to us.
Well, why don't we have a few more general comments, and then we'll have some questions and discussions.